The desert was not silent that night. Not the wind carried with it the hiss of sand over stone, rattling like dry bones across the wide, endless plain. The moon burned pale above, throwing a silver glaze over the mesas and jagged canyon walls. Coyotes howled in the distance, their calls echoing like spirits of the dead. And beneath all that, the sound of a girl crying. It wasn't the gentle weeping of someone mourning. It was sharper, desperate, like an animal's last cry when the hunter's knife touched its throat. "Please," her voice cracked. "I don't want to belong to them. Let me belong to you instead." The plea cut through the night like a gunshot. He heard it from the ridge where he sat astride a lean sorrel horse. A man alone, dust-stained coat wrapped tight against the chill, hat pulled low over his eyes. He had been riding hard for days, staying clear of towns, staying clear of people. Trouble had followed him long enough, and he had sworn he'd keep his distance. But the voice, it snagged at something buried deep inside. He nudged his horse forward, slow and careful. Down below, in the hollow of the canyon, a fire flickered. Around it lounged a gang of men outlaws, by the look of them. Dirty faces, whiskey bottles, clinking, laughter rolling rough and ugly. And there she was, the Apache girl, barefoot, wrists bound, her hair tangled from the desert wind. She couldn't have been more than 17, maybe 18. Her cheeks were streaked with tears, but her eyes those black, shining eyes glared with a kind of defiance that no amount of fear could strip away. One of the men yanked her up by the arm, dragging her toward the firelight. She stumbled, caught herself, and then tried to pull back. Their laughter grew louder. "She's wild," one jeered. "Wild don't matter." Another spat tobacco into the sand. "She'll fetch a good price come morning." The man who held her smirked, turning toward the others. "Unless one of us wants her first." The cowboy's hands tightened on the reins. His sorrel horse shifted, sensing his unease. He could ride on. It wasn't his fight. The world was cruel, and he'd learned to keep his head down, to let the storm swallow what it would. But still, her words rang in his skull, echoing like church bells. "Let me belong to you instead." Belong. A dangerous word. The cowboy swung down from his horse. His boots hit the sand with a soft thud. He led the animal to a rock outcropping, tied the reins loose, and rested a hand on the worn grip of his colt. Then he walked toward the fire. Every step seemed louder than it should have been. The crunch of gravel under heel, the brush of his coat against his thigh. By the time he reached the edge of the firelight, the outlaws had gone quiet. Faces turned. Hands drifted toward their belts. "Evenin'," he said, voice low, even. The leader, a broad man with a scar running from ear to chin, narrowed his eyes. "Ain't no business here for you, stranger." The cowboy tilted his head toward the girl. She stood frozen, caught between hope and fear. "Looks to me like you got business that don't rightly belong to you." The men chuckled, but the sound was edged with tension. "She's Apache," the scarred man said. "Ain't no law says she belongs to anybody, but the man's strong enough to keep her." "That so?" The cowboy stepped closer, the firelight catching on the steel of his revolver. "Reckon you boys best unhand her then." For a moment, silence. The fire popped. Sparks drifted into the night sky. The girl's eyes never left his face, pleading, terrified, but burning with something else too. Then came the laughter again. Harder this time. One outlaw spat into the dirt. Another raised his rifle, just enough to show he had it. "You alone, mister?" The scarred man sneered. The cowboy's jaw tightened. "That's right. Then you're a fool." The first shot came from the outlaw with the rifle. Quick, sharp, echoing off the canyon walls. The cowboy dropped to one knee, revolver clearing leather before the sound had even died. His return. Shot cracked like thunder. The rifleman spun, fell backward into the fire, sending flames leaping high. Chaos erupted. The girl screamed, jerking free as the men scrambled. The cowboy moved like a man possessed, every shot measured, every step deliberate. He fired once, twice. Two more men went down in the sand. Bullets whined past his ears, chipping stone, kicking up dirt. He rolled behind a boulder, reloading. With quick, practiced motions. His heart hammered, breath ragged, but his hands were steady. He had been in fights like this before, too many to count. And each time he swore it'd be the last. The girl crawled toward him, hands still bound, face streaked with soot from the fire. "Help me," she gasped. "Stay down," he growled, rising to fire again. The scarred man cursed, rallying the fuse still standing. "Kill him! Don't let him take her!" More gunfire. The canyon became a storm of sound ricochets, screaming. Horses panicking, men shouting. The cowboy felt the sting of a graze across his arm, the burn of powder in his lungs. But he kept moving, kept shooting, until the laughter and jeering had turned to groans and silence. At last, only the scarred man remained, crouched behind the wagon. His breathing came heavy, ragged. He knew he was outmatched, but pride burned hotter than fear. "This ain't over." He spat, eyes glowing in the firelight. "She ain't yours to take. She'll never be yours." The cowboy raised his Colt. Steady, cold. She ain't nobody's but her own. The scarred man lunged from cover, pistol flashing. The cowboy fired. The outlaw spun, dropped his weapon, and collapsed into the dust. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of flames and the distant cry of coyotes. The cowboy lowered his gun, chest heaving. He turned toward the girl. She stood trembling, still bound at the wrists, but her eyes, those fierce, defiant eyes, never wavered. He holstered his revolver, pulled a knife from his belt, and cut the rope around her wrists. She rubbed at the raw skin, then looked up. At him, for the first time. Her voice was soft. "Why?" He stared at her, long and hard. He didn't have an answer he could put into words. Maybe he just couldn't walk away from that cry. Maybe he was tired of letting the world rot while he rode past with blinders on. Maybe, just maybe, he'd been waiting for something worth fighting for again. Instead of answering, he simply sighed, "We need to move. They'll have friends." She nodded, swallowing hard. He whistled low for his horse. The sorrel came trotting from the rocks, ears flicking nervously at the smell of blood. The cowboy mounted, then offered a hand down. To her, she hesitated only a second, then took it. Her small, scarred hand slid into his, and he hauled her up behind him. As the horse started forward, carrying them into the dark desert beyond. The fire behind them burned high, lighting the canyon walls with a hellish glow. And though the cowboy kept his eyes on the horizon, her words whispered again in his memory. "Please, I don't want to belong to them. Let me belong to you instead." The night swallowed them, but the story was only beginning. The desert had a way of swallowing sound. By dawn, the canyon where blood had spilled lay quiet again, the fire reduced to smoldering ash. Vultures circled high above, waiting to claim what the coyotes had not yet touched. But far from that place, a lone rider urged his weary horse across the sun-baked flats. The cowboy leaned forward in the saddle, jaw clenched tight. Behind him, the Apache girl clung to his coat, her arms wrapped loosely around his waist. She hadn't spoken since the gunfight. Her silence weighed heavy, like a stone he couldn't shake. The horse snorted, hooves dragging in the sand. They'd been riding all night. He could feel its ribs working hard beneath the saddle. They needed water, shelter, somewhere to vanish before the outlaws regrouped. By mid-morning, they found it a narrow canyon cut into the desert, where a trickle of water seeped from the rock and cottonwoods, grew in a thin green line. The cowboy dismounted, knees stiff, and helped the girl down. She stumbled when her bare feet touched the ground. He caught her by the arm before she fell. "You all right?" His voice came rougher than he meant. She nodded, though her face told another story. Her skin was burned raw from the sun, her lips cracked. She looked fragile enough to blow away in the wind. But her eyes still, those defiant black eyes, watched him with an intensity that unsettled him. He led the horse to drink, and filled his canteen and handed it to her. She gulped the water too fast, coughing as it burned down her throat. He gently pulled it back. "Easy. Too much at once'll make you sick." For a moment, she stared at him, as though trying to decide whether he was mocking her. Then she lowered her gaze, silent again. He knelt by the stream, splashing water onto his face. The cold shocked him awake, but it couldn't wash away the memory of last night, the gunfire, the smell of powder, the way her voice had cracked when she begged not to belong to those men. He remembered another voice, years ago, a softer one. His wife's, the way she had laughed when he told her he was done with gunfights, done with drifting. They'd built a small place together, cabin, corral, a patch of land worth more than gold to a man tired of wandering got, and then she was gone, taken by violence, the kind he couldn't stop. Since then, he'd carried nothing but his Colt and the silence of the trail dot, so why had he stepped in last night? Why hadn't he ridden past, like he'd sworn he always would? The answer lingered behind him, sitting cross-legged by the stream, her torn dress damp as she cupped water into her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was rough, almost broken. "They took me from my people." He looked over. She didn't meet his gaze. Her eyes stayed fixed on the water. "My village was small," she said, "hidden in the canyons. We lived quiet. Then the raiders came. Guns, fire." Her voice faltered, but she pressed on. "They said I'd fetch a price to some man who wanted an Apache wife, a possession." The cowboy's fists clenched in the dirt. She turned to him suddenly, her expression fierce, despite the tears threatening her eyes. "I will not belong to them. I will not." He held her gaze for a long moment. "You don't belong to anybody." Her lip trembled. "Then why did you take me?" The question hit him like a bullet. He looked away, unable to answer. Maybe because she had asked. Maybe because he couldn't bear to hear that cry and do nothing. Or maybe because some part of him wanted to believe a man could still make a choice that wasn't soaked in blood. They spent the day in the canyon, hidden beneath the cottonwoods. The cowboy repaired a hole in his saddle, while the girl rested in the shade. Every so often, he caught her studying him, as though weighing whether he was savior or captor. When the sun dipped low, he roasted a strip of jerky over the fire. She ate it without complaint, though he saw the distaste on her face. "You ever shoot a gun?" he asked. Her head snapped up, startled. He slid his revolver across the sand toward her. She stared at it, hesitant. "Take it," he said. Her fingers brushed the grip, light as a whisper. She lifted it clumsily, the weight pulling her hand down. He moved behind her, adjusting her stance, steadying her arms. She flinched at his touch, but didn't pull away. "Breathe slow. Squeeze, don't pull." The shot cracked, echoing down the canyon. The bullet chipped stone. She jumped at the sound, nearly dropping the Colt. But when she looked back at him, her lips twitched just barely into something almost like a smile. "That's better," he said. "Takes practice." For the first time, she seemed lighter. Not free, but no longer powerless. That night, while she slept curled in a blanket by the fire, he kept watch. The stars spread endless above, cold and brilliant. But the wind carried. Faint sounds, a horse's whinny, the distant strike of hoof on stone. His gut tightened. The outlaws were hunting. He kicked dirt over the fire, then shook her awake. She blinked up at him, confusion giving way to fear as she saw his face. "They're close," he whispered. "We ride." Within moments, they were mounted, the sorrel snorting as the cowboy urged it into the night. Behind them, faint lanterns flickered on the ridgeline. Voices shouted. Gunshots cracked. The girl clutched him tightly, her face pressed to his back as the desert rushed by. Bullets whined past, sparking against stone. The cowboy pushed the horse harder, weaving through the dark canyons. They rode until the shouts faded. Until silence returned. At dawn, they stumbled upon an old ranch house half burned, leaning, abandoned long ago. Its fences sagged, the corral empty, but the walls still stood. "This'll do," the cowboy muttered. They dismounted, exhaustion heavy in their bones. Inside, the place smelled of dust and old smoke. A broken rocking chair lay on its side. A Bible with missing pages sat on the mantel. The girl wandered the room, touching the scarred wood, the ash on the hearth. "Did a family live here?" "Once," he said. "Not anymore." For a moment, her shoulders slumped. Then she straightened, as though refusing to let despair claim her. He spread a blanket for her to rest. She lay down without protest, eyes closing. The cowboy sat at the window, revolver in hand, watching the horizon. Smoke drifted in the far distance. The outlaws were burning everything in their path. His jaw set. No place would be safe for long. The girl stirred in her sleep, murmuring words in her language, fragments of a song, maybe, or a prayer. He didn't understand, but the sound lodged deep in his chest. He looked down at his revolver, at the worn metal that had ended more lives than he could count. Then he looked back at her. "You don't belong to anybody," he had told her. But the truth was harsher. If they kept running, she'd end up back in chains or worse. If they stayed, the outlaws would come. The horizon burned with rising smoke. The cowboy tightened his grip on the Colt. Trouble was closing in. And this time, it wasn't just his own skin on the line. The sun was a merciless overseer that morning. It rose above the desert like a blazing coin, flattening shadows and baking every stone, every scrap of scrub. From the broken ranch house, the cowboy scanned the horizon. The smoke was closer now. He could smell it, burning wood, burning hopes. The outlaws were driving a path of fire across the land, choking every place they might find refuge. He knew their kind. They wouldn't stop until they had her back. Behind him, the Apache girl stirred. She rubbed sleep from her eyes, blinking at the orange haze drifting in the distance. "They're coming," he said simply. Her throat tightened. "We can't outrun fire." "No," he said, eyes narrowing. "But we can hide where the fire won't follow." By noon, they had left the burned ranch behind. The sorrel horse trudged beneath the weight of two riders, sweat darkening its flanks. The cowboy led them into a canyon maze, the stone walls rising red and jagged like frozen waves. The girl leaned close, her voice trembling. "Where are we?" "Going?" He tipped his hat toward the mountains. "Old mining town up ahead, abandoned years ago. Ain't much left but broken boards and ghosts, but it'll give us cover." She said nothing, but her grip tightened around his waist. Hours later, the ruins appeared, a scatter of weathered shacks, a leaning saloon, a crumbling church with no bell. The wind whistled through broken windows, carrying the creak of loose boards. They dismounted, leading the horse into the shell of the livery stable. Dust swirled in shafts of sunlight. The girl's steps slowed as she took in the empty street. "It feels wrong. Ghost towns usually do," he muttered. "Best get used to it. We'll be here a while." The days in the ghost town passed like coiled springs still, yet filled with tension, ready to snap. The cowboy patched the roof of the stable for shade, scavenged rusted tools for nails, and set traps along the canyon trail. At night, he listened for hoofbeats, every sound magnified in the empty silence. The girl grew restless. She paced the streets, fingers brushing along walls carved with old initials. At times, her face hardened, eyes distant, as though she were seeing her lost village among these ruins. One evening, as the sun bled red over the mesas, he handed her a rifle. She blinked at it. "This is not like your pistol." "No," he said, guiding her stance. "Heavier, kicks harder, but it'll reach farther. You'll need that." Her hands trembled as she lifted it. He steadied her shoulder, firm but gentle. "Remember what I told you. Breathe, squeeze." The crack echoed down the canyon. The tin can on the fence spun and clattered to the ground. She startled, then smiled despite herself. "Better," he said. She straightened, pride flickering across her face. "I will not be weak again." He met her gaze. "You never were." A fragile peace didn't last on the third night. As the moon climbed, the cowboy heard it, the faint jingle of spurs, the low murmur of men. Shadows slipped along the canyon rim. Lantern light flickered, growing brighter. The girl crouched beside him in the stable, clutching the rifle. Her breath came fast, shallow. "They found us," she whispered. He nodded grimly. "Stay low. Don't fire till I say." The outlaws moved into the ghost town like wolves, spreading wide, rifles ready. Their leader, the scarred man who should have been dead, rode at the front. A bandage wrapped his side, but his eyes burned hotter than ever. "Bring her out," he bellowed into the night. His voice echoed off the canyon walls. "She's mine. The man who took her's a dead fool, and she'd be crawling back to me before dawn." The cowboy's jaw tightened. He had put a bullet in that man, yet here he was, risen like the devil himself. The trap didn't hold. They'd set snares along the trail, but the outlaws were too many. Shots rang out, ricocheting off stone, breaking windows, sending splinters. Flying, the ghost town roared alive with violence. The cowboy fired from the stable window, dropping one, then another. But a shot cracked too close, splintering the post near his head. He ducked back, heart pounding. "Run!" He barked at the girl, but before she could move, the stable door crashed open. Rough hands grabbed her, dragging her screaming into the street. The cowboy charged after them, revolver raised, but the butt of a rifle smashed across his jaw. White pain exploded. He hit the ground hard, guns skittering into the dirt. Voices shouted, boots pounded. A kick drove the breath from his ribs. Another struck his back. He tasted blood, choking on it. Through blurred vision, he saw the girl struggling, clawing at the men holding her. She screamed his name, or maybe she just screamed, but the sound cut through him sharper than any blade. They tied his hands, left him bleeding against the church steps. The scarred man loomed over him, sneering. "You think you can take what's mine, cowboy? She learned her place soon enough. And you," he pressed his boot against the cowboy's chest, "you'll rot here with the ghosts." The girl thrashed in the grip of two men, her voice hoarse with fury. "I am not yours. I will never be." The scarred man laughed. "You'll sing a different tune by sunrise." The cowboy struggled against the ropes, teeth clenched. "Don't listen to him." His words were ragged, but his eyes found hers. "You're stronger than you think." Something lit inside her then. Not fear fire with sudden fury. She bit the hand of the outlaw holding her, ripping free. She grabbed for the rifle slung on his shoulder. He cursed, trying to wrestle it back, but she slammed the butt into his face. The crack of bone echoed. He dropped. The others lunged, but she swung the rifle wide, firing. The shot blasted a lantern, flames spilling into the dirt. Horses screamed, rearing. Chaos broke loose. The cowboy seized his moment. He kicked the scarred man's leg out, sending him sprawling, then rolled toward his dropped revolver. Rope burned his wrists as he fought free, but he didn't stop. His colt barked once. Twice outlaws dropped screaming into the dust. The girl reloaded clumsily, hands shaking, but kept firing. The canyon roared with echoes, gun smoke choking the air. Shadows danced against the red stone as flames spread. Up there! The cowboy shouted, pointing to the rocks above. High ground. Together, they scrambled up the canyon wall, bullets sparking around them. Dust stung their eyes, lungs burned, but they climbed, firing back down. The outlaws followed, shouting curses. From the ledge, the cowboy turned, eyes locked on the scarred man below. The outlaw raised his pistol, rage twisting his face. You can't take her from me. She ain't yours, the cowboy growled, steadying his aim. Both fired. At once, the canyon rang with thunder. The scarred man staggered, clutching his chest. Blood bloomed across his shirt. He stumbled, snarling, then toppled backward into the dust below. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of fire and the ragged breaths of the living. The girl dropped beside the cowboy on the ledge, chest heaving, eyes wide. Her hands were blackened with powder, her face streaked with sweat and blood, but she was alive. Alive because she had fought. He looked at her, seeing not the frightened girl who had begged for freedom, but someone harder now. Someone forged by fire and blood. For a moment, neither spoke. The canyon walls seemed to hold their breath. Then came the sound, distant, faint, but unmistakable. The beat of more hooves. Reinforcements. The cowboy's stomach turned to stone. A fight wasn't finished. He looked at her, his voice low. It's not over. Not yet. Her fingers tightened on the rifle. Then we fight until it is. The canyon waited. Blood already stained its walls, and more would come before the sun set. The canyon walls blazed gold in the dying sun, jagged peaks cutting the sky like teeth. Dust swirled under the horse's hooves as Jake urged his stallion harder, his jaw clenched. Behind him, Alara clung to his back, her arms tight, her tears hot against his shirt. Every hoofbeat echoed with a single truth. If they failed to reach the canyon before dark, the posse would catch them, and they would tear her away. The shouts carried on the wind. Men's voices, angry, greedy, merciless. The sound of rifles being cocked. The echo of pursuit. Jake. Ilara's voice was barely a whisper. They'll never stop. You should let me go. Save yourself. Jake turned his head, his face set like iron. Don't you ever say that again. I swore you'd never belong to them. You belong where you choose, and if that's with me, then they'll have to ride through hell to change it. For a moment, her breath caught. A flicker of hope returned to her eyes, like a spark in ashes. She pressed her forehead against his back, holding tighter. The canyon mouth opened ahead, wide and dark. Jake yanked the reins, and the horse plunged into the shadowed gorge. Rocks jutted like blades, the path narrowing, twisting, hiding them from sight. Behind, the posse thundered closer, their torches flaring as night fell. They dismounted, leading the horse deeper through a maze of boulders and jagged cliffs. Every sound magnified the rattle of pebbles, the cry of a distant hawk, the pounding of Jake's heart. He motioned Alara against the rock wall. Stay low, he whispered. Dot from the cliffs above in the posse's voices. She's in there. Run him down. Don't let that half-breed witch slip away again. Jake's hand tightened around his revolver. He pressed his back to the stone, scanning the shadows. He knew this canyon, the old hideout of rustlers and outlaws. And he knew its secret, the caves. He grabbed Ilara's hand. This way. They slipped through a narrow crevice, into a cavern carved by centuries of wind. The air was cool, damp. Stalactites dripped slowly from above. The light of their pursuers flickered at the mouth of the cavern, hunting, closing in. Alara trembled. "Jake!" He cupped her face in his calloused hands. His eyes, sharp as steel, softened for the first time since the chase began. "No matter. What happens? Listen to me. You are not theirs. You never were. You don't belong to anyone but yourself. And if you'll have me, I'll fight till my last breath to prove it." Her lips parted. Tears slipped down her cheeks, not of fear now, but something deeper. She nodded. "Then I belong here. With you." A crash of rocks. Boots on stone. The posse had found the entrance. Jake spun, pulling her behind him, revolver raised. The first outlaw appeared, torch in one hand, pistol in the other. His face twisted in triumph. "There she is, the Apache girl. The boss'll pay double to. Have her alive." Bang! The outlaw crumpled before he finished his sentence. Chaos exploded. More men rushed in, gunfire sparking, bullets ricocheting off stone. Jake moved like lightning, firing, ducking, reloading. Each shot was short, sharp, brutal. Alara pressed against the cavern wall, her heart in her throat, praying, shaking, whispering his name. Dust filled the air, acrid with gunpowder. One outlaw lunged close with a knife, slashing at Jake's side. Jake grunted, blocking the blade with his forearm before slamming the man against the wall. The knife clattered. The outlaw slid down, unconscious. "Jake!" Alara cried as blood streaked down his sleeve. "I'm fine." He barked, though his face tightened in pain. "Stay?" Down, but there were too many. Shadows poured into the cave, torches burning, voices shouting then dash out of nowhere. A thunderous sound split the canyon. Hooves, dozens of them. War, cries. The echo of drums on the earth itself. The Apache had come. From the cliffs above, Ilara's. People descended like fire. Painted warriors, their faces fierce, their bows drawn, rifles cracking. The posse turned in shock, their shouts now screams as arrows rained, horses crashed, and the canyon thundered with vengeance. Ilara's eyes widened. "My people?" A warrior's voice called in Apache. Ilara's breath caught. She knew that voice. Her brother. He burst through the melee, his hair streaming, his rifle blazing. When his eyes fell on her, they softened. Even his fury burned around him. "Sister," he shouted, "we came for you." Alara stumbled forward, torn between blood and choice. Her brother reached for her hand. "Come back. You belong with us." The words froze her heart. "Belong?" She turned, her gaze falling on Jake, bleeding, bruised, yet still standing in front of her like a wall against the world. His revolver shook in his grip, his chest heaving, but his eyes, those eyes never wavered. Alara's. Tears blurred her vision. Her brother's voice cracked. "You are Apache, not theirs, not his." Her heart pounded. Every memory of her people, every scar of their rejection, every moment of her loneliness. And the moment Jake looked at her and said she belonged only to herself, slowly she stepped back from her brother's outstretched hand. "No," she whispered. "I don't belong to anyone. Not them. Not you. But if I choose," she turned to Jake, her voice rising through the chaos, "I choose him." Silence rippled through the canyon. Even amidst gunfire, the words carried her brother's eyes. Filled with hurt, rage, pride, grief all tangled as one. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, with a war cry, he turned his fury on the posse instead, his rifle blazing. The battle raged until the canyon floor was littered with torches, broken, guns, and the groans of defeated men. The posse scattered, fleeing into the night, hunted by warriors who vanished as quickly as they came. Alara dropped to her knees beside Jake, pressing cloth to his wound, her hands trembling. "Stay with me, please." He chuckled weakly, even, as blood stained his shirt. "You're bossy for someone who didn't want to belong to anyone." Her laugh broke through her tears. "Then maybe I belong where my heart is, and it's with you." Jake's hand found hers. His grip was weak, but steady. "That's all I needed to hear." Dawn rose over the canyon. The dust had settled. The silence of the desert returned, broken only by the rustle of wind through the cliffs. Alara stood at the edge, the rising sun painting her face in gold. Jake sat on a rock, his arm bandaged, his eyes on her. She looked back at him, a small smile tugging her lips. "So, Cowboy, where do we go now?" He tilted his hat, squinting against the light. "Anywhere you want. The whole damn West is yours to belong to or not, long as I'm ridden beside you." She walked to him, took his hand, and helped him to his feet. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel owned, didn't feel trapped. She felt free. Together, they mounted the stallion. As the horse climbed the ridge, the canyon lay behind them, bloody, broken, remembered. Ahead stretched the wide, untamed frontier. Alara leaned against Jake, her voice soft but certain. "Then let's ride. Belonging doesn't mean chains. It means choice. And I choose us." The horizon swallowed them, two figures riding into the blaze of morning. She thought she would always belong to others, claimed, used, discarded. But in the canyon, she learned the truth. Belonging is not given, it is chosen. And sometimes, choosing love means choosing freedom. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Until the next tale from the Wild West,